Jai Baba, everyone. Jai Baba. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mayhair Center virtual presentation that Dr. Jamie Newell will be giving to us today. Today is April 21st, 2024, and today is actually the first day in 1952 when Baba stepped on center. So it's a
Wow.
particularly special day here at the center. The presentation that Jamie will be giving is called Meher Baba of Ahmednagar, His Life in Historical Perspective. And today is a continuation of the series that Jamie has given, and it is called Religious Experience and Meeting His Mentors 1913 to 1921. And we just wanted to say welcome to everybody, Jai Baba, and I'd like to hand this over to Jamie Newell.
Thank you, Susan. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I appreciate you guys all coming. It'd be no fun if there was no one here to listen. So hopefully you can see that, Susan.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good. All right. So as she said, welcome to Meher Baba of Ahmednagar, His Life in Historical Perspective. This is the third in our series on Meher Baba, and it's focusing on his religious experience and meeting his mentors. And you'll notice, because my training is in history of religions, we use the word religion and religious, and religious studies scholars dislike the word religion and religious almost as much as followers of Meher Baba do. But we not find a really good substitute for it. So you'll hear me use that from time to time, but it's just a generic term to cover a lot of area, more area than it really works, but we won't get into that today. So just a kind of review of what we've been doing. We began this series with the story of Merwan Irani's encounter with the Muslim holy woman, Hazrat Babajan. And having discussed in our first presentation the general framework and methodology that we're going to be using throughout the series, in our second presentation, we attempted to place young Merwan in the context of the Persian Zoroastrian community of the British military cantonment area of Pune, India, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So in the presentation today, we're going to return to that pivotal moment in the life of Merwan when he met Babajan. And as I've said before, there are many interpretations that we can come up with for what exactly happened when Merwan met Babajan. From the perspective of history of religions, it's not really our place to determine which interpretation is correct, but we do want to kind of look over some of the possible explanations and try to figure out how that works. It's not just an idle exercise to kind of work our minds. How we interpret and how we understand Merwan's experience will dictate how we understand and how we interpret the subsequent life of Merwan Irani, that is Meher Baba, as he developed into a spiritual leader, who we know as Meher Baba of Ahmednagar. So it's important, and really there's a lot of different possibilities. Of course, the first one is the sort of the obvious thing that the local people said that he was mad. People who follow him just absorb the religious narrative that Meher Baba told about himself and about his spiritual status. And then there's a variety of different ways to look at, from a religious studies perspective, understanding religious experience. I'm going to focus a little bit today on an anthropological view. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but it's just to kind of give us a sense that it's important that we think about what was going on there, that we allow for people to have their own thoughts about that, and I want to provide just some different perspectives as we do that. So, as we've already talked about, we're going to be looking at Meher Baba's life primarily through three different lenses. Again, this is just a little more review for people who maybe haven't attended the other installments. The first lens is, as I've said, the academic lens of the history of religions. The second lens is the central importance of Meher Baba's encounter with Babajan and his own interpretation of that experience. We're going to be obviously focusing on that a lot today. And the third lens is the essential role of Meher Baba's Persian ethnicity in influencing his life, how it affected his life, his personality, and his subsequent work as a spiritual leader. So also, this is in our first presentation, we talked about and identified four categories, or what I like to call schemas of value, that run through the poetry of Hafiz of Shiraz. And of course, why is that important? Because Meher Baba loves Hafiz, and it's a part of his Persian ethnicity. So the working hypothesis that I have, that I bring to the table here, is that these same schemas of value can be identified as informing many of the behaviors and choices that Meher Baba made throughout his life. And today, as we talk about his religious experience or his experience with Babajan, I think this will play into also some kind of explanatory model as to how he understood and communicated that experience. So the categories that I've identified, and there are many, I just kind of zeroed in on four, that appear in the work of Hafiz and that continue to appear in Meher Baba's life, are the theme of the lover and the beloved, which implicit in that is the union versus separation. Union being the ultimate goal. Implicit in that also is the idea that love really is the goal of the universe. It's the Shakti that enlivens the universe, enlivens creation, and it's the way to the spiritual goal in the poetry of Hafiz. And when I say the poetry of Hafiz, I mean the Sufi interpretation of the poetry of Hafiz. There's many other ways of interpreting the poetry of Hafiz, but Meher Baba's father and Meher Baba himself are really exemplars of people who understood the poetry of Hafiz through this Persian Sufi lens. So the first schema of value is the lover and the beloved, and love is the goal. It's sort of a reflection of that, which also goes through the poetry of Hafiz when read through this Sufi, Persian Sufi lens, is the master-disciple relationship, and that's a lover-beloved disciple, lover-beloved relationship. The disciple being the lover, the master being the beloved. Another category that shows up repeatedly in Hafiz, sometimes as wine or intoxication, reason, sobriety. This is the dyad of madness versus reason. And at fourth was the theme, and this was an innovation of Hafiz to bring in ghazal poetry. There always was lover and beloved. There always were a lot of Sufi type themes, but he was really an innovator to bring in this idea of hypocrisy versus authenticity. And again, we'll get into that later. What we're going to do today really is focus on this particular category of madness versus reason. And our understanding of this category and of Meher Baba's interpretation of this dialectic between madness and reason is, as I say, I think it's critical in understanding and interpreting this pivotal period of Meher Baba's life. So, for many of you, this may not seem important, but to ground this and to be able to bring some kind of interpretive lens into understanding Meher Baba's life, it is important. So, just to illustrate some of this, prior to Meher Baba's meeting with Babajan, his life was dominated by reason. That would be not Meher Baba, but Merwan, young Merwan Irani. His life was dominated by the theme of reason. He was a well-behaved, orderly young man. He did well in school. He was well-liked by others. He had no particular interest in spirituality other than adhering to the tenets of his Zoroastrian faith. By all accounts, including his own, he attended the Parsi fire temple. He would say the Zoroastrian prayers, and he generally behaved in ways, followed the ethics that were congruent with his faith. And he excelled so much in his schooling that in December of 1911, at age 17, he was accepted into and began attending the venerable and distinguished Deccan College of Pune, which is still in operation in Pune. But so that's before meeting Babajan. After his meeting with Babajan, virtually everyone in his community and the surrounding environs considered Merwan to be completely mad. They thought he was a lost cause. He was hopeless. Even his own mother was it's really a sad and often amusing tale of just how despairing she was over the state that her son had fallen into. Her prize boy, her favorite of all the children, just gone as far as she was concerned. And apparently only his father, Merwan's father, interpreted Merwan's experience with Babajan in a spiritual context. So with the dawning of the colonial period, anthropologists, we talked about the colonial period a lot in the last installment, anthropologists began to tour the globe, began to study people and religions of other cultures. And when anthropologists viewed what they called religious specialists, people who were active in religious practices, who they called religious specialists, they viewed them in two categories. One was there would be shamanic religious specialists, and there would be priestly religious specialists. And in the shamanic category were found individuals who claimed to experience revelations of various types. They had spiritual experiences which they claimed to be authoritative for other people. And often they practiced various healing practices, and they claimed to have encounters with various types of spirit beings and things like that. Now, the priestly religious specialists were seen as being people who preserve the revelations of others and preserve the tenets of those revelations. So there's two clear categories. Originally, they called them priests and prophets, and then later scholars, as studying shamanism became more popular, they decided to call it priests and shamans. But my point in bringing all this up is that if an anthropologist had come upon Merwan between the years of 1913 and 1921, and if he saw Merwan as a religious specialist at all, he would most probably have placed Merwan, and later Meher Baba, in the category of a shamanic religious specialist. And I say this because it's going to give us an additional frame to how we try to follow in a logical and a grounded, rational way what was going on with Merwan when he met Babajan. So there's an anthropologist who I'm very fond of named Jacob Pandian. He's a symbolic anthropologist, and he has said that a shamanic religious specialist is the prototype for total or partial union between the symbols of the self, that's the identity of the individual, and the symbols of the sacred other, that would be God or some deity or other. He's trying to, again, put a frame that covers a lot of different religious phenomena. He says, in the various religious phenomena, symbols of the sacred other, again, God or spiritual beings, are experienced through these different religious practices and what have you. And the shamanic religious practitioners often become identified with the symbols of the sacred other. And this is, he's describing what happens when people have trance states, have revelatory experiences, and they then become identified with the symbols of the sacred other or the symbolic representations of God. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that Merwan, Meher Baba, was a shaman. What I am saying is that if we were to categorize Merwan, Meher Baba, anthropologically, he would fall into the category of a shamanic religious specialist. Well, why is that important? Well, as I say, it gives us one more lens to think about as we go through the story, which we're going to get to him describing his own experience. And as we listen to that, this is just another frame that we can kind of use to intellectually engage with that without having to necessarily enter into the whole religious narrative and become a follower and all that. So from the perspective of the history of religions, there is considerable evidence that Merwan did have some kind of ecstatic visionary experience, similar to, though characteristically different from, those that are reported by shamans in indigenous groups. this is just another perspective, as I say, for trying to understand Merwan's experience after meeting Babajan. So, just to give you an example and see why I think this really does give us something to reflect on. This is a quote from an anthropologist published in 1914. This is taken from an anthology of many quotes from anthropologists about shamans. But Marie Antoinette Chaplitka, I think is how you pronounce it, and she says this, quote, whether his calling be hereditary or not, a shaman must be capable, nay, an inspired person. Of course, this is practically the same thing as saying that he is nervous and excitable, often to the verge of insanity. So long as he practices his vocation, however, the shaman never passes this verge, that is, he never goes over the line into a psychotic or an insane state. She says it happens that before entering the calling, it often happens that before entering the calling, persons have had serious nervous afflictions. Thus, she gives an example, a Chukchi female shaman, Telpina, according to her own statement, had been violently insane for 3 years, during which time her household had to take precautions that she should do no harm to the people or herself. This is before she started practicing shamanism. And now here she quotes other anthropologists, and she says, he says, I was told that people about to become shamans have fits of wild paroxysms, alternating with a condition of complete exhaustion. They will lie motionless for 2 or 3 days without partaking of food or drink. Finally, they retire to the wilderness where they spend their time enduring hunger and cold in order to prepare themselves for their calling. Now, again, I'm reading these because as we get into Meher Baba's own narrative about himself, you'll see there's some parallels there. Again, she goes on, to be called to become a shaman is generally equivalent to being afflicted with hysteria. Then the accepting of the call means recovery. In other words, they get better once they start doing shamanic practices. And she quotes another anthropologist who says, there are cases of young persons who, having suffered for years from lingering illness, usually of a nervous character, at last feel a call to take up shamanistic practice, and by this means overcome the disease. End quote. So again, this is an example of how anthropologists look at similar phenomena to what Meher Baba went through with Babajan. Now here's Meher Baba's own perspective on reason versus madness from one of his discourses on the musts found in Dr. William Donkin's 2000, his book, some of the 40s actually, but I've got the 2001 copy, the book The Wayfarers. So for Meher Baba, musts are individuals who appear to be mad, but are actually, as he interprets it, quite spiritually advanced. So this is how Meher Baba is. This is just a partial. I encourage people who are interested in this topic to read those 2 discourses in the beginning of The Wayfarers, but this is just an excerpt from that. He says, quote, when the must states are measured by the standard of realization and expression of truth, they will inevitably be interpreted as having increasing degrees of sanity. When viewed in the light of the truth, the average pattern of responses and behavior, which is the most common standard for measuring degrees of madness, would itself appear as a veritable form of madness. So he's saying that the musts appear mad, but that's because people who we think of being normal, from that perspective of being oriented towards the truth, this is the narrative of Meher Baba's whole cosmology, which we'll get into as the presentation progresses. But the idea from his narrative is that real sanity is orienting oneself towards God and turning away from the illusion of the world. And he's saying this is the state of the musts. They appear to be mad, but they're much more sane than the average. The average person is actually mad because they're not turned towards God. And then he says that ordinary forms of madness, people that we would call mad, we so-called normal people would call mad, ordinary forms of madness which have failed to reach even the average pattern would present themselves as deeper levels of madness. So again, this just puts another perspective into the mix, similar to the shamanic perspective, or the anthropological perspective on shamans, but it's adding this a definition of value, of reality, which is again related to this lover beloved concept that God is the beloved, the person, the must turned towards God is a lover. And notice again when he talks about musts, the name of the book is The Wayfarer's Meher Baba with the God Intoxicated. This idea of God intoxication is directly related to this Sufi idea, which appears in Hafiz, of being reason and madness being related to being intoxicated with love for God. Again, we'll get into a lot more of that when we get to the module on his work with the musts. So, to sort of summarize, the Pune community thought that young Merwan was mad. That's one interpretation. And of course, kind of leaving out the obvious, there's also the interpretation that followers of Meher Baba have, which are in line with his narrative, which we're going to get to in a minute. But the anthropologists see some forms of aberrant behavior as being cured when the afflicted individual begins to practice shamanism. We can say then that in those cases, the affliction is the result of the unwillingness of the individual to enter into and embrace their own revelatory experience. They've had a revelation, they try to repress it, they don't want to take on the responsibility. It's many stories of Meher Baba with the musts, where the musts kind of run away because they don't want to take on this responsibility. So this is the interpretation that some anthropologists have. Some of the early anthropologists said these people are crazy, but more and more contemporary attitudes about shamans and shamanism are more in line with what Pandian says and what we've been reading. So now, adding yet another interpretive frame to this mix, Meher Baba says that some revelatory experiences may cause an individual to act abnormally, but this form of abnormality is actually above the line of abnormality. This is actually above the line of normality, not below it. In other words, these people who seem insane are actually more sane. And of course, when we apply it to Meher Baba's experience, his interpretation is that as well, that he's oriented towards and identified with, as Pandian had said, he's identified with this symbol of the sacred other and identifies himself as being conscious of this God state, which state came to him through his interaction with Hazrat Babajan. And that's, again, we're going to hear a lot more about that in a minute. But to provide just some context for this period of Merwan's life when everything shifted pretty dramatically, let's just take a look at what was going on in the world at that time. So beginning in the mid-19th century and into the early 20th century, it became very popular to believe that through science and through positivism and through the progressive ongoing of civilization, humanity was going to continue to unbroken heights of rationalism and achievement. Everything was going to be rosy, and things were just going to be, science was going to flourish, and people were going to be very rational, and all these pesky emotions and things were going to be put aside. But the catastrophic events of the early 20th century really brought a lot of this into question and really shook a lot of people to their core. But according to Meher Baba now, in January 1914, Hazrat Babajan made him, quote, realize in a flash the infinite bliss of self-realization. This is his interpretation of his encounter with Babajan. She made him realize in a flash the infinite bliss of self-realization. That's January 1914. In July of 1914, a war broke out in Europe that was one of the deadliest in human history, just unbelievable carnage. Between July of 1914 and November of 1918, approximately 9 million soldiers were killed, 23 million were injured. In addition to that, close to 8 million civilians died from multiple causes, including genocide. Now, as a consequence of the troop movements during this war, in 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic broke out, killing between 17 million and 50 million people worldwide. And a lot of people think it's actually much more than that. Some estimates go as high as 100 million because communications were not that good at that time, and people were just dying, and people didn't always attribute it to the Spanish flu, or they just didn't report it, et cetera, et cetera. So lots and lots of death and destruction during that whole period. Now, the Indian Army, this war impacted India as well. The Indian Army was actually called the British Indian Army, since the British were still very much in control of India. The British Empire had dominance there. So the troops from India, through the activities of the British Empire, were involved in World War I as well, as part of the British war effort. Through this effort, more than 1 million Indian troops served overseas, and out of these 1 million troops, more than 60,000 Indian troops died during the war. So a lot of this suffering and world difficulty was also felt throughout the subcontinent. Now, the barbarity of this war, the use of mustard gas, it's one of the first times anybody used really this kind of weapon. Machine guns, they'd never used machine guns in conflict before, certainly not in such a mass scale. So it was really shocking, the slaughter of soldiers using this means. It shocked the civilized world. It brought all of the optimism and positivism of the previous decades into question, and caused many people to question institutions, to question religion, to question the meaning of life and their governments and everything. It was just, everybody was disappointed. And no one really knew. Even now it takes whole college courses just to figure out why in the world did all of this happen. Nobody even knew what they were fighting for. So it was during this time that Merwan wandered throughout India in a state that looked like madness as he sought out spiritual individuals. And these are individuals who he later identified as what he describes as perfect masters or God-realized individuals. So, with all that context, that's a lot, I realize, and some of you may have fallen asleep while I talked about the anthropological and shamanic aspects of trying to figure out reason and madness in all this. But this is a theme that's going to continue. As I said, we're going to talk about it a lot with the Musk. We're going to talk about it really all through, because there's if Merwan is above the line, then a lot of people are being left in the dust and they don't like it and they're highly critical. So is that what's happening? Is something else happening? It's an open question, but it's trying to put all of the data sort of out there on the table. So we're returning now, within all that context, we're returning to Merwan's life at the time when he met Hazrat Babajan. Now, by 1913, the Irani family had moved to a flat some ways down Malcolm Tank Road. And if you're familiar with Pune, this is no longer called Malcolm Tank Road. It's, for the most part, it's called Dastur meaning priest, Dastur Meher Road, named after Baba. They wouldn't call it Avatar Meher Baba Road. That would be too controversial, so they called it, because he's a Zoroastrian, Dastur is a Zoroastrian priest, they call it Dastur Meher Road. But down that road, past the Shivaji market and past the main camp area, it's down towards the area we talked about last time, where he had grown up as a little boy, but they moved to another area called the Bhagwan Das Chaul. No one actually knows. I was talking, I was kind of fact-checking a lot of things, because I had been fact-checked with the last one. I talked to Peter Nordine about a lot of this, and he said that no one knows the actual, and when he says this, he knows it well, because he talked to Mani about it, and he talked to Jal, Baba's brother, who also lived there. Both of them lived there at one point. Maybe not Mani, but Jal did. But no one knows the exact address. They know the address of the first one when he was a little baby. The other one, that it's somewhere in this area of the Bhagwan Das Chaul. Another thing that Peter told me is that picture that we were concerned about, that's actually was Baba's uncle. There's a picture of, which has been identified in Lord Meher and in Narshwin's books as Shariar, is actually Shariar's brother, Baba's uncle. But that's just a little fact check for everybody. So during this period, every day when they were in that Bhagwan Das Chaul, Merwan would cycle through the camp area, past the Bund Garden, and those of you who have been to Mehrabad will have driven past Bund Garden and over the Mula River Bridge, which Merwan went through there every single day, school day, and attended classes at Deccan College. And all that Merwan knew about Babajan was that she was respected by some people and that he saw her occasionally when he cycled down Malcolm Tank Road. Now, this is an actual photograph of Malcolm Tank Road, and I'm really interested to hear the Southeast Gathering, I think 2 weeks ago, Narshawan Anzar was giving a talk, and he showed this is actually was a postcard of a picture of someone in a bullock cart going down Malcolm Tank Road. And according to Narshawan, I don't know if you can see it where you are, but this little group here, this is actually a group of people, and he says that they were gathered around Babajan, and that Babajan is actually kind of in that picture, but behind all these people who were gathered around her, which I was just fascinated to hear that. So you can probably find, if you look up Malcolm Tank Road, Pune, you'll probably find this picture on the internet, and you can check it out for yourself. If you have any questions about it, you'll have to check with Narshawan, because that's all I know about it. Let me see. Okay. So now, when we consider the life of any historical personality, it's always important to try to learn how they understood themselves and how they wished to be understood. So rather than rely on secondhand accounts to understand how Meher Baba experienced and interpreted his meeting with Babajan, his self-report is of particular interest to us. And I'm going to quote now from a little bit from Lord Meher, and then a big chunk from the appendix. It's called Reminiscences, the appendix of Listen Humanity. And I'll say more about that as we go along. But this is transcribed talks by Meher Baba about his experience. So he says, quote, "When I was studying in school, in college, I was not interested in reading about all these things, of course. I had nothing to do with spirituality. I never read philosophical or spiritual books. My father, Shariarji, was thinking all the time of God and searching for him. He was a seeker, a great seeker. He roamed on foot from place to place in Iran, then came to India. He was searching, but he couldn't find what he was looking for. In India, he married. Why? Because of past connections, past impressions, or sanskaras. When I was in college, I met Babajan. I was going to college on my cycle, and Babajan was sitting there under a tree. Around her, she had a group of some Pathans. They are very stalwart people, very fierce-looking. I had the great pleasure when I was doing research for my dissertation. I met a man named Akbar Khan, very sweet man, very nice. He was a truck driver, but he was affiliated with Babajan's shrine, and his grandfather was one of these Pathans who sat around Babajan. And I interviewed him, and he told me a lot about that. And he said his grandfather would take him by the hand and tell him about being with Babajan and how much he loved Babajan. And this man was a real lover of Babajan. It was really very sweet to talk to him. But they're from the north of India. Babajan was from the north of India, and they're very, as Baba says here, they are very stalwart people, very fierce looking. And Babajan, he says, the old lady just called me, beckoned me, and I got down from the cycle. Then she kissed me on the forehead, and I knew. I had that experience. At that very moment, everything disappeared, vanished completely. Why? Because I found myself infinite. There was no room for anything else besides me. That kiss made me infinite, so that there was no room for anything else. Everything vanished but me. How can I explain that experience to you? But when you get that experience, you come to know." And that's from Lord Meher. Now, this is a similar account. This is, as I said, from the Reminiscences appendix in Listen Humanity, and there are little parenthetic notes, descriptive notes, dates and things. These were inserted by Don Stevens afterwards, but I'll include them, but they're again, parenthetic from the editor, Don Stevens. So Baba says, quote, "With just a kiss on the forehead between the eyebrows, Babajan made me experience thrills of indescribable bliss which continued for about 9 months. This was in May of 1913. Then one night, January 1914, she made me realize in a flash the infinite bliss of self-realization, or God-realization. But after I became self-conscious, I could not have said all this, nor could I say it even now if it had not been for the indescribable spiritual agonies which I passed through for another period of 9 months, until October 1914. In returning to normal consciousness of the suffering of others. Now, this is really fascinating to me. He says that because he has universal consciousness, as he returned to the gross world, the suffering was brought on by returning to normal consciousness of the suffering of others. In other words, his explanation is that he was experiencing consciously the suffering of everyone in the world. And imagine the suffering that was going on there with the situation I just described. So again, this is his narrative of what he experienced. So during those 9 months, I remained in a state which no one else could have tolerated for even 9 days. During the first 3 days of my superconscious state, January 1914, I was truly dead to everybody and everything other than my own infinite reality. Although my physical body continued to function more or less normally, actually dead, though really living, I was consequently considered by others to be seriously ill. I was allowed to remain in bed, lying with wide open, vacant eyes which saw nothing. Remember the descriptions of the shaman going through a similar state. Quote, on the 4th day, and after I was slightly conscious of my body and began to move about without any consciousness of my surroundings, I received no promptings from my mind as would an ordinary man. I had no knowledge of the things I did or did not do. I did not sleep and had no appetite. No one had any idea throughout this period that I sat, talked, walked, lay down, and did everything by instinct, more like an automaton than an ordinary human being. My sleepless, staring, vacant eyes worried my mother most. She believed and told others that I had gone mad. In her anguish, she could not refrain from going once to Babajan and demanding to know what she had done to me. Shireen Mai did this because she knew that I used to go and sit near Babajan for a while each night during the previous 9 months, from May 1913 to January 1914. Babajan indicated to my mother that I was intended to shake the world into wakefulness, but that meant nothing to Shireen Mai in her distress. For a long time, I was given regular medical treatment, but no amount of drugging and injections could put me to sleep. Later on, this is in April 1915, later on, I also began to go for long distances on foot or by vehicle. Once I left Pune by rail for Raipur, more than 300 miles south of Pune. Again, this is one of Don Stevens' parenthetic notes. To Raipur, but after traveling for only 34 miles, I felt the urge to leave the train at Kedgaon. There, for the first time, I came in physical contact with Narayan Maharaj. And again, Don Stevens identifies him as one of the 5 perfect masters. Narayan Maharaj, whose ashram is not far from that railway station. Similarly, from time to time, I was also drawn to see majzoobs like Bane Mian Baba at Aurangabad and Tipu Baba at Bombay. Once in the company of Behram, Behram was later nicknamed Bua Sahib by Baba when he became a disciple, but now he was just a school friend. Once in the company of Behram, I traveled as far north as Nagpur and saw Tajuddin Baba. Again, Stevens identifies him as another of the 5 perfect masters. Finally, December 1915, I felt impelled to call on Sai Baba, the perfect master among masters. And Meher Baba has identified him. He says there are always 5 masters, 5 perfect masters in the world, and there's one who's the head of the 5, and at this time he says that head was Sai Baba, the perfect master among masters. At that time, he was returning in a procession from Lendi in Shirdi, a place to and from which he was led every day in order to ease himself. Now, this is a remarkable fact about Sai Baba, is that every day there would be a procession, often with a band, music playing, and people, throwing flowers and just being reverential. While he went to lead to ease himself, to go to the bathroom in a field, they would have this pomp and circumstance just for this event, this great event. So, despite the crowds, Baba said, I intuitively prostrated before him on the road. When I arose, Sai Baba looked straight at me and exclaimed, Parvardigar. And there's a Gustaji, one of the disciples of Baba, was a witness to this. Baba goes on, I then felt drawn to walk to the nearby temple of Khandoba, in which Upasani Maharaj was staying in seclusion. And that really is, it's not even maybe a quarter of a mile, probably not even that far from this area where Sai Baba sat. It's right down the road. Our good friend, many of you know, Minu Barucha, was sent to Upasani Maharaj's ashram to see what Upasani was doing. Was sent there by Baba, and he used to take people to Shirdi and to Sakori, and he showed us this temple where Upasani had been fasting under Sai Baba's directions for a long time. He had been sent there to fast and sit in seclusion in this abandoned temple, the Khandoba temple. As Baba says, he had been living on water there under Sai Baba's direct guidance for over 3 years. At that time, Maharaj was reduced almost to a skeleton due to his fast on water. He was also naked and surrounded by filth. When I came near enough to him, Maharaj greeted me, so to speak, with a stone which he threw at me with great force. It struck me on my forehead exactly where Babajan had kissed me, hitting with such force that it drew blood. The mark of that injury is still on my forehead. But that blow from Maharaj was the stroke of Dhyan. And Don Stevens says divine knowledge. This is Don Stevens again. Now, I'm interrupting this narrative just to show you, remember he says the mark of that injury is still on my forehead. This is a copy of Meher Baba's passport from, I think sometime in the 30s, supposed to say 1933. Now, why am I showing you Meher Baba's passport? If you look at the description here, it says, what's his profession? Spiritual teacher, Pune, where he was born. He lives in Nasik. Hair is brown. Color of skin is brown. Color of his eyes is brown. Color of his skin is brown. Visible distinguishing marks, scar in the center of eyebrows. It says that on his passport. I'm fascinated by that. So you can't see it in the picture here, but it was still distinct enough in the 30s that apparently it could be used as an identifier on his passport. So returning to Meher Baba's narrative of his experience, he says, quote, figuratively, Maharaj had started to rouse me from sound sleep, but in sound sleep, man is unconscious, while I, being superconscious, was wide awake in sound sleep. With that stroke, meaning the stone that hit him in the forehead, with that stroke, Maharaj had begun to help me return to ordinary consciousness of the realm of illusion. That was the beginning of my present infinite suffering in illusion, which I experienced simultaneously with my infinite bliss in reality. But it took me 7 years of acute struggle under Maharaj's active guidance to return completely to and become established in normal human consciousness of the illusion of duality, while yet experiencing continuously my super consciousness, close quote. So that's quite a narrative of his experience and how he interpreted the whole thing. And he spent, as he says, 7 years with Upasani Maharaj during this period between, would have been probably 1915 or so until it would have been actually 1914, because it was 1921 that he left Maharaj's ashram. Now, after his first meeting with Upasani Maharaj, Merwan would often go to Maharaj's ashram. Now, this is a time lapse because eventually, uh, again, according to the narrative, Sai Baba made Upasani Maharaj a perfect master. He did was then sent to set up his own ashram, to begin to function as a master himself, and he had an ashram, and Merwan would go to Maharaj's ashram in Sikori and stay with him for periods of time. And Sikori was a distance, but a walking distance from Shirdi, where Sai Baba's place was. Now, this fact that he would go and visit Maharaj all the time would upset Baba's mother, Shireen. She often went to both Babajan and Upasani, demanding that they give her back her son. As far as she was concerned, her son had been stolen from her, and she was very displeased about this. Eventually, though, during this period, many of his family members and friends would visit Merwan at Sikori. Now, this is some of his family members. This is his uncle. I think his name is Fardoon, and various family members. This is Gulmai, who was also a follower of Upasani and eventually became a very, very important follower of Meher Baba. We'll learn a lot more about her as we go on. This is the Talatis, Dina Talati and Naval Talati, or Novel. And they are sort of the in-laws, grand in-laws of the past head of the trust, Sridhar Kelkar. And of course, these other people who met Baba at Sikori was Mera. This is little Mera Irani, and who became the chief woman disciple, and her sister Frani there in that picture. So again, he also met many future disciples at Sikori, and those are some of them. Now, returning to Meher Baba's description of what he experienced, he says, quote, "The more normally conscious I became, the more acute my suffering grew. For years, therefore, I continued to knock my head frequently on stones. That was how I eventually lost all my teeth, for through the constant knocking, they became prematurely loose." This is an extraordinary statement, and I don't know what to make of it, but there it is. This also resulted in a wound which was constantly fresh, and therefore I always used to keep a colored handkerchief tied around my forehead. And this, of course, is an example of that, this photograph. So throughout this period, Shireen was beside herself with worry, as Meher Baba himself has described. She continued to hold out hope that her beloved Merag would return to his studies, would once again live a normal, successful life, hopefully get married. She really wanted him to marry and have grandchildren and to be a successful businessman. And meanwhile, of course, the entire Parsi community was talking about how sad it was that this once promising youth was staying out late at night, sitting with this crazy woman, and that now he himself had gone completely insane, and he's traveling around, traipsing after, in those days, if someone who is particularly associated with a staid and well-respected community, if they then started following masters and saints and things like that, they said they'd gone native, or they'd become jungly. And this is what people thought about Merwan. It was really quite a scandal, and very disappointing for people who had these worldly hopes. Again, the normal people who were kind of focused towards the world rather than towards God did not embrace this narrative that he was realized. So there are many stories about how Shireen tried to get Merwan to take a job. Eventually, he taught Persian to his friend Baramji, who, again, as I said, later became his disciple Buasaub. But he refused to teach anyone else, so he couldn't, be a tutor or something. He also worked a couple of days a week at his father's first toddy shop on Sachapir Street in the camp. Now, if you know, again, the camp area, I was describing Malcolm Tank Road, which is now Meher Dastur Road. And that first intersection, big intersection you come to as you head towards Babajan's shrine, is Sachapir Street. And if you turn right on Sachapir Street, you go down there, and there's what had once been a Bindra house where Erish's family lived. And they had moved there to be close to Shireen because Gai Mai and Shireen, Erish's mother Gai Mai, and Shireen, Baba's mother, were very close, and Baba asked them to be near Shireen, to look after Shireen. And also, those of you who know the Karawallas, Roshan and Sam Karawalla lived right down that alley off of Sachapir Street. So on that street was one of his father's, Merwan's father's toddy shops. And also there is this down the other way towards the Mahatma Gandhi Road and there's now a Kashmiri shop there, but in the basement was a kindergarten where a little baby Merwan went to kindergarten. That's still there from what I understand. So again, continuing with Meher Baba's narrative, he says, "The more I returned to worldly normality, the more impatient my mother became to see me settled into routine life. To satisfy her, I joined the Khan Katan Theatrical Company as its manager in 1916. Can you imagine? There's Meher Baba in his the suit that his mother wanted to see him in as a prosperous Parsi gentleman, traveling around. Lord knows how he was able to run a theatrical company while going through all this that he was going through. But he says to satisfy her, he joined the theatrical company as its manager and traveled with the show to Lahore. And this really was through the auspices of a friend of the family, which again is an interesting story that's recounted in Lord Meher. So it was after this period that Merwan went into partnership with his friend Baramji, this Buasab, and they bought a toddy shop in the Kasba Peth section in the west of Pune near the Mula River. And the Kasba Peth is, interestingly, because it's near the river, is known as an area where fishermen lived and people who were related to businesses related to the river. And this was the beginning, as he was getting more and more integrated. You hear about his toddy shop, and this is where he met and befriended people like Sadashiv Patel, really was Sadashiv Patel's mother, and Vishnu and his mother and family. They all began, so little by little, he's still in this state, but little by little, people are being attracted to him. And because he's still in this devotional relationship with Upasani Maharaj, he started a little room dedicated to Maharaj. He rented a small room, and there he held devotional programs, and there would be singing of artis and songs of praise, especially to Upasani Maharaj. And imagine he's serving toddy and kind of he's kind of a bartender during the day, and then he would gather all these people who would start to be attracted to his charismatic personality, and they would go and sing songs and do artis and things. And so all during this period, as he became more lucid, Merwan would tell his friends and acquaintances about his masters and about the spiritual life. And as he did so, he attracted people to him who later became disciples, many of whom remained with him for the rest of their lives. Out of their respect for him, people began to address him as Merwan Seth, which is a title of respect. And people, old friends like Dr. Ghani and others who would meet him and they saw people treating him with respect, they'd become confused because they didn't realize, they didn't know this narrative of what had happened in his relationship with Hazrat Babajan. So several years later, and this is again returning to Meher Baba's own descriptions, he says, several years later, after becoming almost 3/4 normally conscious, while retaining full superconsciousness, I went to Sikori and stayed for 6 months. This is from July to December of 1921, staying near Maharaj. At the end of this period, Maharaj made me know fully what I am, just as Babajan had made me feel in a flash what I am. During those 6 months, Maharaj and I used to sit near each other in a hut behind closed doors almost every night. On one such occasion, Maharaj folded his hands to me and said, "Merwan, you are the avatar, and I salute you." Well, after this final stay with Upasani Maharaj, Merwan Seth moved out of his family home and began living independently. Although he had already accumulated a number of devotees around him, at this time he continued to gather disciples, and he, for the first time, began functioning as a authentic spiritual master in his own right. Previously, he identified himself simply as a devotee. He was still a devotee of Upasani. He was still a devotee of Babajan, but now he was functioning as a spiritual master himself. So I hope it's become evident why I say that this was such a pivotal period in Merwan's life. In the span of 9 years, he went from being a successful college student to being labeled the Mad Irani, and then to becoming a charismatic personality who continued to draw people to him as a highly functioning spiritual personality. And just to sort of underline how he interpreted his own state and how he understood his relationship with Babajan is a lovely poem that I want to close with. This lovely, I don't know if it's a ghazal or what this is a translation, but this is Merwan singing the praises of his master Babajan. He says, "O beloved master, I am eternally grateful to you. If I had 100,000 lives, I would sacrifice every one of them at your feet. You drowned me in the eternal ocean of oneness and transformed me into an ocean like yourself. In the twinkling of an eye, you made me a lover. You made a lover into God, and God I have become. O Emperor of Masters, O Ocean of Mercy, O Perfection personified Sadguru, if your merciful glance falls on anyone, a beggar turns into a king. Gods, goddesses, angels, celestial beings, and men are all awed by the brilliance of your divinity. O enlightened master of the three worlds, even if I were to transform my body into the sandals of your feet, it would be nothing in comparison with what you have done for Merwan." And that is pretty much all I have to say about that. There's lots more to say about it, and anybody who wants to explore some of those ideas, some of those questions that we brought up, please, I hope we'll have a little discussion. But I do want to let you know the next meeting will be on May 19th. Talk 4 will be on gathering of disciples, early ministry, and his silence. And after that, we're going to skip June. I hope to plan to be in India during the month of June, but we'll pick up again in July. So thanks, everybody.
Also, just want to let you know that talk 1 and 2 that were given in the prior months are currently available on the Meher Center website under virtual programs. So talk 1 and 2 is available, and I've put the link into our chat, but I'll just put it up once again in case.
And why are they available? They're available because Susan McDonald has taken really great effort to make really nice. Not really, it's very, very nice work that she's done. It's painstaking, and I appreciate it very much, Susan. Thank you for doing that.
You're very welcome. Well, we're super grateful that you're able to do these talks on Baba from that historical perspective. So really appreciate it. I just wanted to say thanks again so much on behalf of all the people here and Meher Spiritual Center for your hard work and preparing all these presentations on the historical life of our beloved Meher Baba.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me to do it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And as we finish out, I'd like, if you'd like to join in saying Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai, that'd be wonderful.
All right.
Meher Baba.
Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Avatar
Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Love everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Jamie.
Jai Baba. Thank